Good. Is there any questions? Who wants to kick off? Good. Brian. Now, Brian, thank you very much. I was on a panel that Brian chaired last night, so I'm going to give him a softball. Give us a good question, Brian.
Thanks, Albert. For those of you on the panel who don't know me, I'm Brian Glick. I'm the editor of Computer Weekly. There was a common theme, either spoken or unspoken, across all what four of you were saying about. Bindi in particular mentioned it specifically, and that's skills. Liam, GDS and the government are doing the biggest insourcing of digital skills, of IT skills it's ever done. After 10 years of outsourcing it all, it's bringing it all back. Paul talked about Ocado as a pure play e-commerce player, doesn't really do much with suppliers, does it all in-house. That's very much the same sort of story I hear from most pure player, most digital sort of businesses. Expedia, I would guess, is probably similar in ways. So there's this huge optimism now about IT at the moment. The event that Albert was talking about this last night at our event. There's probably more optimism and positivity in IT and digital at the moment than has been for maybe 10 years. But there's a problem because the education system isn't giving us young people with development skills or with the motivation to learn development skills. Over the last 5 years, corporate training budgets have disappeared. Companies aren't training people with digital and agile skills. And there's a real risk that a lot of this optimism over the next few years could be lost if we don't have the skills available and talent available to be able to fill all these roles and all these jobs that are going to be coming up. I'm interested to know what the panel think. How big an issue is that? Is that something you see, and what do you think needs to be done about it?
Okay, who got that one? I think the investor. That's a made-for-TV question.
No, I can only talk anecdotally from the hundreds and hundreds of companies that are our clients here in the UK, and the number of queries we get for, do you know someone that can do this? Do you know someone that can do that? And I think it is a problem, the right skill set. It isn't homegrown, and something needs to be done about that, but that's going to actually take a long time to homegrow that skill set. So it's about trying to bring those right kind of skill sets into the country, which is actually proving to be a problem. So for example, and Liam, you can back me up on this, there's the entrepreneur visa, which will allow the founder to come in and set up the company, provided they hire the right number of Brits. However, it's actually the next tier that's the problem. So the CMO, the CTO, the management team that's going to grow that company, that's actually the proper skill set gap. I know one fast-growing startup, won't say who, but I think they'll be one of the next big British exits. They've been looking for the right CFO for 2 years because it's a CFO that needs to understand that particular vertical. The skill sets don't exist here. They exist in the Valley, and they need to bring people in. So I think for me, that's one of the big problems, and I think it has to fall down to the government to look at immigration policy in this very high growth sector. So again, just anecdotal from what I've seen.
I can't, my brief doesn't cover immigration policy.
Yeah.
But you've asked a problem.
Yeah, this is one of the issues that we do have. I think also there's been a huge change in the way that we approach the initial supply of this, and this isn't going to solve everything overnight, but the launch of coding for children will start to change this in 10 years' time. But in that 10 years' time, we've still got to address the issue. Okay, it is a great initiative to do coding schools. I'm really fundamentally behind it. The IT curriculum in the UK, as was the best way of putting people off IT as a career that you would find. As you wouldn't find anybody doing it beyond 16. And yet, we need to find a way of bridging that gap, of finding the skills. Now, a lot of that is about starting and being able to put in the facilities for people to learn how to code, the facilities for people to learn about technology, which they need to learn later in life. And there are some good examples of that we've seen in the States. There are some ways that in some ways we could think about introducing, or we should think about introducing academies for it, where you can take over a floor and use it. But I think also part of this is we fundamentally need to address the ability, it's a supply and demand issue, and we need to be able to address more and bring in more skills. We do find it we do find it difficult to find people with the skills, but we don't find it impossible. We have grown from 0 to 250 in the last 2 years. But I suppose part of it is part of our job is, and the good side for us is, we've got a good. People don't join us for the money. People join for the mission.
I thought you were going to say pension there. just before, can I just ask the audience if they can just comment, if anybody has an idea about this and they've got a burning need to say something, skills. What how did you come into technology? What is wrong with school? What is wrong with policies? Anybody have a gentleman at the back there?
So I have a real frustration going to my kids' parent-teacher night. I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. There's a misnomer in the school called ICT. My children absolutely hate ICT, and I've asked them why. It's because they're taught how to use word processors, spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations. The analogy is teaching kids life skills on how to use an ATM machine or write a check. We don't call that finance. Somehow teaching kids life skills on how to do the electronic needs of being in an electronic age, we call that ICT. They're not called coding. So they don't want to take the skills. So my kids have no aspiration to go into computing science, which is a shame because they have the mathematical aptitude, but the school system puts them off. And when I speak to their teachers, the biggest complaint is the national curriculum. So by the time they're going to start working with Raspberry Pis, they'll actually be towards the end of their secondary school term. And this is a shame because they're not taught at a young age that there is a difference between life skills and computing skills. And therefore, hopefully you can attract people. And you say, well, it's just, the terminology that you put. Unfortunately for my children, computing science is PowerPoint, Excel, Word.
And that is why the changing policy, which begins, we've got the Year of Code starts on the 4th of February, which is being launched. And the start of its use in the curriculum is imminent. So, I mean, that is one of the things that we are removing that particular part from the curriculum. That is government policy.
In the interim, you should
and it's being replaced by coding. But the other thing is, okay, fine, they go to 3, 4, 5 duff lessons a week at work, at school, whatever. I mean, look at the things like Kano and Code Academy and those tools to get your children to work to enjoy computing offline.
There's actually something called Code Club around the UK, and it's for kids aged 9 to 11. So your kids hopefully fit in that bracket. And it's from 4 to 7 p.m. And that's just grown like wildfire after school club. And if it doesn't exist in your area, start it.
My son goes to a Raspberry Pi club.
Yeah, so I think it's down to you guys as well to create that change.
I think some of the challenge, and I think we've spoken, some of the figures that you shared, I think were very, very interesting and startling. But some of the challenges is the world is moving, technology is evolving at a very, very fast rate. And again, I can't speak for the government, but I'd imagine it's very hard for an educational policy to evolve at the same time. And I speak around.
Actually, no. This is the big thing, because the idea of the real thing. I mean, the thing we used to call that approach too, because I did actually spend some time as a teacher, and I taught computing. And one of the things that we found was that was like cycling proficiency test. In terms of what they wanted you to do. You had to tick a bunch of boxes so you get a qualification. Why do we have a qualification in this? You should have awards for it. So if you think of things like Apps for Good, Debbie Forster and her work there, it's based around the fact that you should be able to award for this on what you do. And that enables the curriculum to change as technology changes.
And something I would add is that I think it's a hugely important message here to get across if we want more children to go into this, is that learning to program is not about you wanting necessarily a career as a software developer. It is a meta skill that has a value to it, whatever you're going to do in life. And we have to get people stopping thinking that the only reason you want to learn how to program is if you want to be a software engineer or geek. Actually, you need it because you're going to need it to survive. And I think it's beholden on us who work in technology companies to think beyond just getting involved in universities, that we've got to go right back and get involved in converting primary school thinking, because it's going wrong at that stage. The rot is setting in there, or it has been setting in there, and that's where we need to change people's ideas, and it's going to take time to filter through, obviously.
Can I just ask, can I just ask how many of you know about the government's policy, the new education policy on teaching children to code in schools?
My daughter's actually started it, and it's turned it around.
How many of you? Okay, so we've got quite a big big job to do in making sure that that people know about this. Can I just give a comparison? That one of the things we did with, if you look at the best digital economies in the world, or the best digital countries in the world, okay, Estonia, South Korea, Israel, all of them use, that's one of the fundamental parts of their education policy, is teaching children how to code.
Gentlemen, after
so it's a question related to that about really getting startups and technology companies involved in the curriculum. We work with an academy in Edmonton to help design their technology curriculum, and I guess your thoughts on that and how that could other companies could get involved and how you think that could work.
Well, thank you. It's my turn. Get involved. That's great.
Yeah, I think we do see a lot of like Code Academy, Code Club, Decoded. We're seeing a lot of those initiatives pop up from within actually the startup community. And they're working hard to encourage the entrepreneurs to give back to the ecosystem and spend the time.
So in an organisational sense, I think maybe perhaps because it's an academy, they've got a bit more freedom to work with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, one thing I'd
Says
like
the
to
government
say,
that invented academies. Yeah.
No, we didn't. No, this government didn't. The previous government invented academies.
this doesn't solve the short-term problem right now, because the short-term problem right now is finding the skill sets for those fast growth companies. So we're talking about long-term solutions, and it's going in the right direction, but that does not stop the short-term problem. People need to be able to come across here for 2 years and teach us how to grow companies like this type.
But a quick observation, do you think it's because of tech is incredibly devoid of women talent. I mean, it looks great to see so many women in this audience, but actually it's 90% male. That's it's between 10 and 15% female. Is that driving the shortage as well? Because if you're only using half the population broadly, that's going to, by its definition, drive a shortage, yeah?
It's a good question, and I actually genuinely don't know the answer to that one. I think there is a shortage of women in technical skill sets, but that's actually a more fundamental question. I think right now, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, there's just that shortage. And it's actually down to the kind of skill sets required for companies now, for big data, for cloud, for Internet of Things, for wearables. Those skill sets just weren't born here. They're born, in North America, and it's about trying to, fertilize some of that knowledge on this side of the pond. And I don't know the answer, but I think, it's the short-term problem right now.
The correlation between those countries that have excellence in terms of mathematics and computer science is just, unavoidable. I mean, if you look at the trend in terms of, those countries where people have gone to next to find talent, whether it be Google or whoever, it's always following those countries that have very deep mathematical excellence built into their educational systems. And it's one of the reasons why we chose Krakow in Poland for our first development centre outside the UK, because not because we didn't want to keep hiring in the UK, we hire our taps are wide open here. We hire as many as we can find, but it's just we need to start fishing in another pool, and we chose that because of the engineering excellence there, not because it was the cheapest place to go or the nearest place to go or whatever. It was actually to do with that deep kind of engineering or commitment to engineering in terms of their universities, and we've certainly not been disappointed. It's been an extraordinary.
Think about the big technology corporates. So Microsoft, Google, Intel, Apple. All of their big innovation centers tend to be set up. I mean, Israel. It's an incredible example of what's going on in Tel Aviv. Yeah. I mean, all of them have set up their innovation centers, and they have 700 to 1,000, incredible brains focused there. And I remember touring in Tel Aviv, and just the stuff that I saw in every corporate had set up there. India, same thing. China, we're seeing a lot. So, it absolutely is true.
Part of it's about getting your kids to aspire to be that. My daughter did a careers, she's 15, she did a careers 2-hour paper on what was her skill set. Came out as a massive mathematical genius apparently, and was told to go to actuary, accountancy.
Yeah.
That's what we were being told 35 years ago to do. Not
I was a brewing technologist.
Any other questions from the audience? Maybe on another topic? Move the topic on a little bit.
Make an observation actually.
Yes.
Bindi, you were comparing the UK and the US and the views on investment and growth. I work for a startup called the Currency Cloud.
Hi,
thank you for
we
your
know
investment,
you.
by the way.
Yeah, we know you. We like you.
What many people don't know is in the UK it's so easy to, well, there's regulation, but the regulations are there to help companies grow and in the finance space. And because we're part of Europe, once you're regulated in the UK as a financial entity, you can get a European passport and actually transact anywhere in Europe. In America, funnily enough, you have to be regulated for certain financial services in every single state. So, you know, we're growing internationally and we're having to partner with someone in America just to get that. Because if we were to go off on our own and get that regulation, it would take 2 years and $6 million to do so, which obviously isn't very innovative. So it was just to highlight that sort of difference between the US and the
London,
UK. People think that the US is open and free and you can do all this stuff, but actually there's some areas where there's some quite noticeable differences.
I would agree. I think fintech in London is absolutely booming. Media tech, ad tech, fashion tech, actually, we're seeing a lot going on here. But I think there's a lot of correlation between London and New York. They're two cities in a very similar stage of development, but I absolutely agree, fintech. And what's happening at Canary Wharf and the Level 39 facility, it's incredible. Are you guys based up there?
No, we're based in the city, but I think if I was to, I mean, I'm in a startup, but if someone wanted to start a financial startup, you wouldn't want to start it in the valley.
No, it's true. It's London or New York or Singapore. Absolutely.
One of the things that I found very interesting to back you up, so to give everybody a live example, is the largest, most successful industrial conglomerate in the world, which starts with GE, hired us to hire technology people to put into their Connecticut head office. We eventually helped them hire CTOs, 7 CTOs last year, out of Silicon Valley to put them in a new GE facility in Silicon Valley, because we can't even get people to move from the West Coast to the East Coast, and to move even further afield is even more difficult. So just picking up on that skills and location and co-location and the sort of good karma that comes with being at the right place. We talked about, Paul, you talked about the sort of stuff around the whole of the UK, was it Bindi? But where we used to spend all our money in the UK, it was you, Liam, you spend all your money in the southeast, and now you're spending much more outside. So this whole thing of location for talent and for fun.
It doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah,
no,
it's
I think it's a global thing. Yeah. It's not a UK thing, as Paul said as well. You know, we have centres of excellence in Hungary, in India, because the quality of the engineer is fantastic. And so I think it's, you know, it's tough maybe in Silicon Valley because, you know, it is a hotbed to get people to leave. I can understand that. But I think there are countries that have done that, like Israel, that have implemented ways of thinking that gets that talent. So there are ways. So I think there are blueprints from a UK perspective we can look at and see what we can learn.
Expedia, what's your experience? And we've heard from the rest of the panel. What's your experience with, I would say, some of the more hard to find skills?
Well, you know, we're a global company. So we have an office in London. Our head office, we were born out of Microsoft initially. Our head office is in Seattle. Now in Seattle, there's, you know, it's just exploded, right? So I think it's a very relevant point, though. I mean, in terms of engineers, we look globally. That's the way we look at the world. And so I couldn't say personally that we've seen a lack of talent in the UK versus other countries. But I think all of the points raised and by the panel as well and the audience are very valid. I think that's something from a UK perspective we need to look at. There are ways of learning, but I think what I'm hearing is actually motivating children to go into that, to understand how they can join the dots and what this actually means. That seems to be part of the challenge as well. So it'll be interesting over the next few years. I think that the Code for Schools program is fantastic. It sounds like, and we might you'll see that filtering through. It's a case, will there be a gap in the next few years until that does?
I think companies are global from day one. So just being a boring banker, right? When we open up their British bank account, a lot of them, we open up their US dollar bank account immediately because they have to be doing business on that side of the pond. We also open up their Euro bank account as well. And it's very rarely I see a company opening up just with one currency. They're actually setting up multi-currency because they have to be international from day one, particularly if you are starting from a location like London.
If we want to encourage this sort of nation of flourishing startups, I think as well as code, teaching kids to code, there's a whole bunch of other skills that anybody who's been through a startup knows that you need to acquire. You can do it the hard way and learn them as you're doing the first one, but there's absolutely, in a sense, there's a lot of them that we could be teaching children, from an early age, getting ready for that, because there is. Of those that succeed, there are many that probably fail, but not necessarily because they had a bad idea, just because probably, things didn't go their way, but actually with some better priming of the pump, it could have done. So I think there's a whole load of life skills, meta skills or whatever that we should be teaching the entrepreneurs of the future, if you like, whilst they're still in school.
Yes, in front of
Hi there.
Molly from Seattle.
Yeah, I actually live and work in Seattle, and we work with a ton of startups. I work for Harvey Nash, and so this is, everything you guys are talking about is exactly what we're facing as well. The talent pool, although Seattle is booming and blowing up, and we're at the hub of major companies such as Expedia, we still have a tough time finding that top talent. And I mean, we have a ton of recruiters all on LinkedIn, recruiters searching nationally, internationally, trying to relocate, get creative for our clients. So one thing I'm interested to get your guys' thoughts on is, as we see with startups, obviously culture fit is number one, right? And you want to grow a team, you want to grow a culture. And one kind of idea that we've been bringing into a lot of our startups is doing that offshore development, because the workload has to get done, right? And in this economy, you cannot burn out your current employees or you'll lose them. They're getting, 10 LinkedIn emails a day to go work for this new company or do this. So it's attracting that talent, but also not burning out your staff. So I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts are on, these startups expanding into doing offshore development, and if we think this is going to be a major impact in the next, 5 to 10 years.
Most startups I know have developers in Eastern Europe. That's how they get it done, and that's how they build quickly and scale quickly. So I see it on the ground all the time, would be my observation.
You'll forgive me if I say that our aim is not to. We have a long-term view.
I meant to say earmuffs for you.
But we have a long-term view of what we need to do, and we need to build our skills here. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're opening in Newcastle. That's why we're opening in the Northwest. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, one of the things that I found very interesting when Joanna Shields took over as Tech City CEO was the first thing she did was to say there are other places around the UK that are like this, and we identified 26 different clusters and we brought them all together, because there's an enormous amount of talent around the UK, we just often don't spot it. Mm-hmm. But we have the advantage that we have a long cycle time, we can put things together quite quickly. We're doing things very, very rapidly compared to our colleagues and the way that people have done it in our business. In a startup it's completely different, and you can see why people do it. So I would like people to spend more money and spend more and invest more in people here, because obviously, going back to my previous point, tax and national insurance is really nice.
Yeah, just a little theory on this, because I see I visit many of these places in the world, and I know in the US, and Molly and Brittany will tell you, that the cap on the H-1B visa has produced, well, you'll know this, has produced extreme skill shortages. And that is presented as a bad story by the media, but actually what it's doing is forcing companies like us, Mortimer, Spinks, to dive deep and start pushing up wages. To be honest, we saw 10% wage growth last year. Okay, it's not perfect economics for the Oxford grad, but it is actually good to push demand into the local economy. Yep. Now, I know that that's a controversial view, but I think if we can, I think that your government, in terms of immigration and the way it's trying to at least say, look, everything just mustn't be thought of as import. Can we train? Can we develop? Can we have our own staff? And dare I say it, the old, not British workers for British jobs, but at least let's make some effort to employ people in this country before we just start importing talent from abroad. So I think that looking at the West Coast, looking at East Coast, looking at parts of Europe, there's actually a lot more you can do before you just go for the least, the easy option.
I think that the one thing that government can do and has tried to do and will always wants to do more of is listen to effective ideas of how to make this work. None of us get in this business to try and make things worse, and so we do need to find out
except Gordon Brown.
I'm a civil servant, mate. I have no view. None of us get into this thing to make it worse. The big thing is that it's a community, and we need to express the views, and we need to listen to the views of the businesses that pay our tax and our national insurance. We do, and we need to be flexible. And there aren't very many dogmatic answers to this, and sometimes entrepreneur visas really helped, and now we're finding out, well, entrepreneur visas aren't enough. Well, great, let's have a look at that. I think that's the best thing we can do. The best that you can, if I'm really honest, the best that you can ask a government to do is to take the regulation that stops growth out of the way, which is what we've tried to do, especially with procurement. We've tried to get that out of the way. To listen to business and adapt where we can, and in many ways, to get out of the way. The sharing economy, which is one of the big new economies. We have a sharing economy. It's about £2 billion. We had them all into number 10 the other day. And the one thing we discovered from that was that government had actually got in the way, because there was all this stuff about disclosure and borrowing and criminal records, which led to trust. So that people were doing rideshare schemes and even down to Airbnb wanted to have more ability to identify what was there and who was staying with them. A way of identifying yourself. Famously, the British government doesn't do an ID card scheme. So that's one of the things that meant that we need to have an identity assurance process. And we need to go wholesale with our government data. We need to be able to open it up so people can access it. Now, all three things in that we are now addressing. The DVLA, we now have an API, which allows people to get the driving data. The identity assurance scheme is going live now. We are doing things to get out of the way, as it were, but also to use our infrastructure to enable business to grow. And I think that's the one thing we can do, but we've always got a mind on trying to get out of the way as much as possible, because there's an amazing economic force in this country which we want to encourage.
Any more questions before I ask? Paul, can I ask you a really hard question?
Okay.
Looking at the fantastic business model that you just showed us, which Liam said, really wowed us.
Yeah.
He articulated that.
Very good.
Where's your talent come from? What's your talent look like? The people that are doing the smart stuff.
It's
are they mostly local?
Oh, I see. Geographically, no, from all over. We recruit people from outside the UK who come and join us. And sometimes, obviously, that involves applying for visas. But a lot of it is homegrown. We have strong relationships with, kind of the top universities, and we try and take as much sort of young graduate talent as we can. And obviously, the internship program I mentioned earlier is an important part of that. But it's from all over. There's obviously some fantastic engineering universities in the southeast. Imperial being one of them that's on our doorstep. So, and I think what's interesting there is we see a very stark difference between a 3-year and a 4-year graduate. The 4-year MEng course there, turns out a different quality of computer scientists we find than perhaps a 3-year. That's not to say there aren't very good 3-year courses. Of course there are, but it's a gross generalisation. But there's something about that extra year that has a disproportionate extra benefit in terms of teaching their craft.
Right, who's going to have the last say? Anybody? Gentleman over there.
Is there a branding exercise that we need to do about bringing up future generations? I mean, we talk about computer science, and that evokes a certain image in your head, which doesn't sound particularly attractive, but we're in the technology industry that goes way beyond just the sort of strictures of a computer science degree that involve, a lot of other skill sets, and perhaps that's what we should be encouraging universities to be doing, is to look at technology as opposed to it being a purely scientific discipline. Yeah.
Well, who do you want to answer that question? Who you direct?
If any of the panel want to
I have one comment, and I firmly believe the geeks shall inherit the earth. And they are. They have, and they are. And you think about them, the Silicon Valley and the CEOs and the kind of wealth generation and the kind of lobbying they can now do in Washington. It's incredible. And I don't think that's going to stop. And I think it's not just having computer science skill sets, it's about having skill sets that surround the industry. So the HR practices are different, the marketing capabilities are different, the business development ways are different, the way to sell is different, and there's a whole generation of skill sets around the industry. So I'm not a technologist, but I have worked in technology most of my career. So I can talk technology, but I was not educated that way.
I think the one change that we effected, and was formally effected earlier last year, was that we made a very great, and it was one of the things that Mike Bracken and I, when we first met, we decided was that, and one of the reasons why I work in GDS, because the whole back office technology function, the technology side of what we do, is a part of digital. And digital is actually the word we use at the moment. Maybe a different word later, but at the moment it's digital. And digital is not just technology. That's one of the things that was really difficult to explain to big CIOs and big departments, was that it's not about technology. It's about user research, it's about experience, it's about performance management, it's about making sure that you actually design around the user. A lot of it is about design. And that's what digital means. Technology is the stationary cupboard that feeds that particular business. And by having that view of digital, that is a much more attractive thing for people to get involved in, and involves technology. Because actually what we're doing is not just about coding. It's actually about providing a digital, what we're doing, we're building a digital government. And that's what, it's multidisciplinary. And let's take the idea that it's all about technology away from it, and that makes it much more attractive to people.
And I think for me, it goes further than just, as you said, that they're not, it's not a specific skill, a technical skill. It's actually a life skill, and there's a whole suite of skills that surround that, and various functions of an online company. And for me, the thing that the people that I see in my profession that really succeed, it's as much about the mentality and their approach, and having that agile approach. I mean, the whole approach that we have is around, as Liam said, is around the user. But you don't know necessarily what the user wants. You can't ask the user and say, hey, tell me what you want. So you set up user labs. You invest a huge amount in test and learn, and you slowly iterate and I think that's what's fascinating about the technology world that we work in, is you do not know. You strip away from the assumptions, and you're constantly learning, constantly iterating, constantly optimizing. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And then you're doing that across multiple different platforms. So, certain a code-based skill 10 years ago would not be relevant now. So I think it goes well beyond just technical skills and skills, different functions, but it is a mentality, which is great. And I think that's something that the startups have brought through necessity. So they've had to innovate and constantly tweak and pivot and iterate. So I think there's that element as well.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm afraid I'm going to say the absolute opposite, not to that, but which is that what concerns me is there is a dumbing down to an extent of deep technical skills. I mean, there's a lot of courses out there that are teaching, odd mixtures of technology, and I mean, and we see some of the students who come for those, and they have not learnt, they have not, even with a 3-year university degree, they have not really learnt how to program. They have not learnt about algorithms. They've not learnt about data structures. They fail at the absolute first hurdle of our assessment tests. So I actually want to push for the opposite of that, which actually we must not dumb down this subject. There are core skills that you need to learn if you want to be, I think, and I say this as a physicist, because when I went through this, there was no computer science at the university I went to. So I think there's got to be a balance, and I think this is in a way one of the, there's good things and bad things about the sort of the fact that the tools have got better. It's great because it's lowered the bar, and to a certain extent, everybody can write an app. Unfortunately, being able to write an app does not mean that you can write software that scales, that is truly resilient, that and we need both. You know, we want lots of people playing around with writing apps, but we also want to make sure we're turning out some hardcore computer scientists and software engineers, who can do the other stuff as well. So I want to make a play for not dumbing down too much.
Well made. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, I think we've had a fantastic panel. It's a real honour to have chaired it. Can you give them one last round of applause?